Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to the 2025 Smithsonian National Education Summit. This is our 2 o'clock session here in the afternoon of the first day. This session is titled Fostering Civic Dispositions in Youth. And my name is Andy Mink. I am the Director of Rural Initiative. My desk is located in the office of the Undersecretary for Education, and we're so pleased that you're with us. It's always a little surprising to me, if I'm honest, that we have so many people register for our online sessions, for our face-to-face sessions, because time is your most valuable currency as a teacher. And the fact that you're spending your summer with us, the fact that you're here to learn and network and contribute to this conversation is really immensely important to us. And we're pleased to have the chance to share this good work with you. Today's format for the next 50 minutes or so is going to be a panel format in which I will serve as the moderator, and we'll have a discussion around this notion of creating activities and programs that foster civic dispositions with young people. This panel will be led by 4 advanced facilitators in a signature civic engagement program we have here at ALS. We affectionately call our office ALS. It's called the Democracy and Dialogue Virtual Exchange Program. My good friend and colleague, Jared Morris, who is manning the chats today, is going to drop a link in the chat box for you so that you can take a look at this on the side. It will not disrupt the flow of what we're doing should you go and investigate that on the side. Each of our educators, each of our panelists have spent 1, 2, sometimes 3 sessions over the course of the past academic year leading deep investigations into their communities and the unique stories those communities hold with teams of youth. These youth have entered a laboratory environment in a way, but rather than what a typical lab might have, Bunsen burners and calipers and measuring devices, these are the labs of the humanities, the labs of storytelling, the labs of culture. And these labs will showcase material culture, art, objects, primary sources, oral histories and interviews, and generally the story that binds us together. And we're very pleased to share this with you. Slide. We've heard quite often at the Smithsonian from Secretary Bunch in particular. If we can advance the slide, please. This notion of the Smithsonian needing to be in every classroom and every community. And in some ways, I think that's conception. That's the beginning of my work in the Rural Initiative. I've been fortunate to travel to many communities around the country to interact and to develop a trusting relationship with the Smithsonian, because I think what we're trying to do is redefine this wonderful complex of learning and research, not just as a destination in Washington, not just as a place that you need to come and navigate. You need to travel perhaps from faraway distances, perhaps to a place that you don't necessarily feel a belonging with, but rather offer it as a public service, as a series of experiences and expertise and a fabric of the culture that can be made available regardless of where you are or what communities that you live in. And as I've done this travel, I have to admit, I've come away and I've come back violently, ruthlessly optimistic. And what I've discovered and what I do believe is that when you interact with communities, when you sit down with people and have conversations, there's an amazing amount of common language, of shared aspirations, of goals that we have for our communities and our young people, loyalty to and appreciation of the unique stories that our communities tell. And, despite the very divisive world that we live in, and maybe that's part of the human condition is to be in divided times, what I can say is that I'm always struck by how much we have in common and how much these conversations, when happening through the right means and through the appropriate kind of applications, are immensely beneficial and immensely an illustration of really the value of America. And we've come to call this the little case democracy, what John Dewey calls this consensual government. And that is not necessarily just the big D democracy, the voting and the mechanics of government, but rather the ways that we learn to get along, the ways in which we learn to live together and draw consensus and value both shared differences and common aspirations. And I think it's really at the heart of this little case D that civic disposition occurs. But this doesn't happen by accident. Civic engagement of any age, of all people, is really born when you practice it, when you apply those dispositions, when there's more than just a body of knowledge, but rather a way of knowing and a way of contributing, a way of imagining your own agency in the community that you live in. And our classrooms and schools are really the perfect laboratory for our young people to practice these dispositions, to engage in activities that give them the skills, the training wheels really, to be active and fully engaged citizens in their local communities, but also certainly in their regional and national ones as well. Advance the slide, please. At the Smithsonian, we really imagine, I think, the upcoming semi-cinquentennial. And we'll advance that slide. Thank you. That is America 250 as a hinge point where civic dispositions can be fully realized. As you heard Dr. Chisholm say in our opening remarks this morning, we don't really see 1776 as a birth date, but rather perhaps as a match strike, as the beginning of 250 years of the American experience. And rather than just celebrate that as a birth date that will come and go, we really aim to contemplate, to celebrate, to commemorate, and to commit to a shared vision and shared conversation. Advance the slide, please. The Democracy and Dialogue Virtual Exchange Program really intends to give young people opportunities to practice these skills and these dispositions around a central and core question: how has your community played a role in 250 years of the American experience? Because every community has had some role in advancing the ball just a little bit, perhaps even just a lot of bit. The Democracy and Dialogue Program, which we affectionately call DIDV, is a program in which we provide training to educator facilitators. Slide, please. Once chosen, these facilitators come from formal classrooms at the K-12 level, come from informal spaces and out of school spaces like museums and public libraries and historic. Part of each cohort receive an in-depth training. They receive a very constructed facilitator toolkit to help manage the creation of these exchanges that includes many tips and tricks and many kinds of information that allows them to design these activities. And then we match them. We match each facilitator with a facilitator from another part of the country. And it's important, this last step, because doing that deep dive in your local community is one thing, but sharing your story with others brings a whole different lens of learning and a lens of understanding. This is not an easy lift, and so we do provide financial relief and support that comes in the form of a $1,500 personal stipend, as well as support of any of the work in terms of coming to the training and implementing the project itself. Slide, please. In exchange, our educator facilitators agree to recruit the students. These students need to be between the ages of 10 and 19, in other words, the middle and high school grades, and really design activities that allow these students to investigate their communities around a central theme. That theme, again, mirrors the theme in the partner organization. And what we've seen is some amazing connections and amazing conversations that happen between these two communities through their youth. Slide, please. Over the course of the past year, we have completed, and by December, we will have completed 187 exchanges in different communities and classrooms representing 35 states. These have broken down pretty evenly between rural, suburban, and urban environments for a total of about 60,000 miles between the exchanges. We have an expectation of how many youth participate. That number has actually gone about 30% higher than projection. As I said earlier, time is our most valuable currency. Teachers know it, but so do kids. And if kids are opting into these programs, whether they're during the school day or after school, then it tells us that something is engaging and something is important. Slide, please. But these are where students get to practice the four primary dispositions that we aim for this program to achieve. That is, to connect and offer a growth of perspective and empathy, to believe and the community awareness and engagement required of civic membership, to participate and to really practice skills of communication and civil discourse, and then, quite frankly, to understand through deep critical thinking and awareness through the slow lens of historical and cultural and oftentimes scientific work to understand the unique story of your community. Slide, please. And these are the dispositions that we're going to investigate now together with our four panelists. Slide, please. Again, I noted that we're being joined by advanced facilitators. These are also advanced educators, and I'm so pleased to welcome Jamie Lathan to the conversation with me. Jamie and I have known each other for a while, and I know that he's a wonderful, fully engaged educator that really aims to invite students to participate in what they learn and what they accomplish. And Jamie, I wonder if you can join us just at the beginning here, just by giving us just a snapshot of the exchange that you created. Maybe introduce your partner, who I think is in Michigan, and tell us just a little bit about the ways that you structured mechanically the exchange itself. Hey, Jamie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andy, and nice to see you all. And good morning or good afternoon. Again, my name is Jamie Lathan, and I had the privilege of being a part of the Democracy in Dialogue cohort, the most recent one. And I joined together. I teach a humanities course, history course, AP African American Studies at a residential boarding school in Durham, North Carolina. Now, the unique part of my course is that my students are not in Durham. They're all over the state of North Carolina. All right. And so it's a distance education course. Through this Smithsonian Exchange, was able to connect with my dear friend, Amy Frontier, who taught English at Pioneer High School in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Now, Amy and I, through the winter kind of training and session that we had in Washington, D.C., connected immediately of our love for the humanities and particularly our love for books. We have both recently read Percival Everett's James, which is a retelling of the Huckleberry Finn story from the perspective of the enslaved African American Jim in that story. We also connected over many other authors that we like James McBride, who's written several books, most notably a book that we read together and a book that Amy assigned to her students, which is The Color of Water. And so for us, those connections led us to immediately think about, when we are assigned to each other, connections like identity, or themes of identity, themes of belonging, themes of voice, and what does it look like to have a voice shared that typically is not shared in a narrative, or when we think about United States democracy. So we both had students 10th grade or higher, and through the connection, we initially connected with a Padlet, asynchronous, asking students to share about their thoughts about what does it mean to have voice, what does it mean, what is their identity, and what connects them to their community. We had lots of wonderful things shared. I had a Native American student from Northeastern North Carolina share a video of a drum circle from a Native American powwow. And she was able to explain that to not only the students in Ann Arbor, but also my students in different parts of North Carolina. So the cool thing about this virtual exchange was that it wasn't just an exchange where my North Carolina students got to know Ann Arbor, Michigan students, but it was an exchange where my students in North Carolina were able to get to know each other because they were from different parts of the state.
Jamie,
Yeah.
Jamie, let me ask you this. I hope you
Yes.
don't mind. We're going to riff and sort of have a conversation here.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Jamie, we imagine our kids, our students, our youth being online and interacting constantly. We imagine them with their devices, connecting with others in other places, telling stories. But what you're describing, it sounds like, is a more meaningful interaction. How did you and Amy both model and create an instructional environment where what they were sharing went far beyond the conversations they might normally have?
I think Amy and I set up some synchronous sessions with our classes, and we began each of those synchronous sessions by a discussion, sort of a scholarly and a friendly kind of discussion amongst ourselves, Amy and I, as colleagues in the humanities, talking about the books like James, or talking about The Color of Water by James McBride. And so I think that was, we were able to model kind of a little bit of vulnerability, a little bit of our own sense of what our identity means and what our community and family means to us and to this and to what to democracy. And so I think that doing that for the first, say, 10 minutes of our synchronous session was very, very important in sort of laying the groundwork and allowing our students to be more comfortable sharing with each other. And so we got things like sharing about foodways and different festivals in Ann Arbor and different parts of North Carolina that students shared about. So when you share about family, I mean, it becomes personal really quickly. And I think Amy and I were able to share that and open the door for our students to do the same.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jamie. And what you're also offering, I think, is a reminder that what the arts do generally, what the humanities do generally, is offer vehicles for us to have conversations about our own human experience.
Absolutely.
My question, though, I think is, you could probably, I suspect, do that really well, you, Jamie Lathan, with
Mhm.
your students here in North Carolina. But what was the added value for them doing the same thing with essentially a co-teacher 1,000 miles away? What did interacting with students in Michigan add to this conversation?
I think it added so the literature piece. Amy taught the American Lit. I think that and our students had not were not reading The Color of Ed. But what I did was I purchased a book for them, and our students were able to add that to their already kind of full curriculum with the AP African American Studies. And so it added sort of a greater kind of context and content fullness with connecting with the students in Amy's class, English Lit class in Ann Arbor. But I also think having teenagers in a different part of the world who
Yeah.
spoke differently, I think it was and had different taste and different things that they did for fun. I think that that was extremely powerful because they were the same age, and just having those perspectives of students in a different part of the nation kind of opened my students up
Yeah.
in ways that they wouldn't have been.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And our new friend, if not good friend, Mackenzie Henn, who's joining us in the audience, has dropped a question in the chat box might that you might be able to respond to as well. And that is
Sure.
this notion of what community is. When I use that term at the beginning, I think probably a lot of us thought of where we live, where we teach, where our families are. But you teaching this course, at least in a virtual sense across the state of North Carolina, you've got a very different definition of community, whether those are virtual boundaries, religious boundaries, cultural boundaries, geographic boundaries. How did you and Amy navigate the shared definition of community as you brought your kids together?
It's almost like having a Google Doc, Andy, where we have this sort of baseline. This is what community is, and our course was this is community, and with the unique thing about a Google Doc is everyone can contribute to it. And so having my Native American student, by the way, had never shared that aspect of herself before, and we've been in class for 2, 3 months, and so just having her share that and several other students shared things about their heritage, their family, and their community. I think that was huge. And so for me, like Amy and I just said, "Hey, all are welcome. We all belong. We all contribute. What unique aspect of yourself, or not even, I mean, what about yourself do you want to share in this safe space of this classroom?" And creating that safe space. And fortunately for Amy, she had already done that in her physical face-to-face classroom in Ann Arbor, and I had done that in my virtual classroom. So and modeling that safety kind of, I think, allowed our students to share in ways, again, like I said before, that they might not would have otherwise.
Yeah. Jamie, thank you. I've got one final question for you, and then we're going to introduce some new panelists. Jamie, we talk a lot about the impact on youth and the practice of civic dispositions in the young people. But if I'm honest, this is also intended to support educators and their professional growth.
Yeah.
How did you and Amy grow as educators? How did civic disposition get displayed in your own teaching through this work?
Wow. So Amy is an amazing teacher, number one, and she's also a scholar. I think the way that she thought about American Lit kind of informed the ways that I thought about African American studies, which is an interdisciplinary course, include bringing together history and literature and art. So number one, like I grew as a scholar, and I'm hoping that Amy can say the same. But also, I think having a colleague, thousands of miles away, who shares a love of the human experience and also shares about her own lived experiences there in Michigan, was very impactful for me, just in terms of even her sharing about other resources, other things that she's done as a professional, as a teacher. And so I for me, it was learning, like iron sharpens iron. I think Amy was really strong iron, and she sharpened me as a teacher, introducing me to resources and other ways in which she engages with students and her subject that I'm so grateful for.
Amy, thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing the story of the exchange that you and Amy created and the wonderful, valuable work that your students did. Allison, you're joining us today from Grove City, Ohio. You also have been in this virtual exchange program for 2 semesters. Allison, it's great to see you again. How are you?
I'm good, Andy. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
Hey, tell us what Grove City is like. Now, maybe not your class or exchange yet, but just tell me about Grove City, Ohio. Where is that place?
So, Grove City, Ohio is a suburb of Columbus, and I teach at Central Crossing High School in Southwestern City Schools, which is actually the fifth largest district in the state of Ohio. But Grove City itself is pretty unique. For about 35, 40 years, Grove City had one high school, and it was that community like that you aspire to. Like you lived there, you went to college, you came back, you raised your family there, and you married somebody you met in kindergarten. And that's kind of like what Grove City was all about, this very prideful area. And then we had a population boom. And when I say we had a population boom, it was crazy. I attended Southwestern City Schools, so I witnessed the whole thing. So then Grove City had to get another high school, which is where I teach. And we are kind of like the redheaded stepchild.
Right.
We are very diverse and we don't really have a sense of community. Our kids come from 3 or 4 different cities, a couple of townships. And so when I signed up for the program, it was because I wanted to help my kids find a sense of identity and a sense of community and like relate to things that, had always been typical, like Grove City, but now like them realizing that they can create a sense of community based on places that they love. In the first semester, that is exactly what we did. We explored things that were in like downtown Grove City that had always like laid claim to the other Grove City high school, whereas like we wanted to see how it related to us. And the kids really found like this sense of belonging within the community, which was amazing. My partner was Alexis O'Brien, and she was from Nampa, Idaho. And so when we had
Why
our
don't we go and
exchanges,
advance this slide right at this point?
okay,
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
no, you're fine.
Yeah, thanks.
So in the first picture, those are my students from the first semester, with our first kind of meeting with the kids from Nampa. And what we did the first semester was I went out and recruited kids that I had had in previous classes, kids that were in my student council, and we met like during like the end of the school day and after school, so they were like fully committed, like they wanted to be there, they wanted to explore a community and like get to know things about this little community our school was located in. And the students that we met with from Idaho, they were not from one high school. Alexis is a school librarian. And so these kids were a part of her teen council. They were homeschooled, they went to private school, they went to public school. So they brought like this whole other kind of wealth of knowledge about community and like how to feel a part of a community because they were from a lot of different places. And so it was neat for like the kids to just like at first sit and like chat with each other and find out like what do we do in Grove City for fun versus what do we do in Nampa, Idaho for fun. And so they really got connected that way. And so it was neat for them to like communicate and kind of see like, wow, like they're doing the same things that we do, kind of in our schools, and for fun.
Yeah.
And so then we kind of transitioned a little bit in the second semester, to like, where am I going? And so it was like, where am I from? Where am I going? And Alexis had the same group of kids, but I used a totally different group of kids. I used one of my government classes. And the things that they did kind of in that second picture there, where the gentleman has the American flag on his shirt, they drew these community maps about where they were from and the things they came up with. Like this gentleman, his parents are divorced. He did where his mom lives, which is not our school community. Somebody else did the Somali tribe area that they're from. One of my other students, her family owns one of the dance studios in Grove City. So she did from dance and she drew like a tap shoe and talked about, like how dance. So giving them freedom to really think about like their community and who's in their community was amazing. I feel like I learned as much from the experience and my students as they did from everyone else. And it was awesome just for the kids to kind of look into themselves and then share that with other people.
Right. So let me kind of unpack that a little bit with you, Allison, because you mentioned at the beginning of your introduction that Grove City, to some degree was kind of a salad spinner community,
Mhm.
a lot of different pieces coming together. Alexis, as you described, is it a library core to a community, but brings kids who don't spend every day in the same place together. So both of you created this exchange with kids without sort of the anchors of, you know, long, deep relationship with the
Mhm.
place. And
Yeah.
then you just said, wow, I learned so much about my place. What did you learn about Grove City? I'm curious, particularly as it ties into the American narrative that this project is based on.
So Grove City has a very small downtown. And when I say very
Mhm.
small, it's like one little street with a bunch of different places. And there's a pizza place there. It's called Planks. Everybody goes there. It's always packed. They sponsor all the sports. And in the first session, two of the girls, they researched Planks. And Planks used to be a saloon. And during Prohibition, you could go there, and they would take people by horse and carriage out of the city limits to purchase their alcohol and bring it back. And so it was kind of like, wow, this place that we just know for pizza, like they were doing some things during Prohibition to allow people, to kind of violate what the government had like instituted, and we kind of praise it as like the best little pizza shop in town. And had they not done this extensive research on Planks, I would have never known that like Grove City had this little, piece of like the temperance and prohibition era
Mm.
that, is a story that you could tell kids to help them understand why we had prohibition and then why it didn't work.
Right.
And so like it was just I learned a little bit more about that. So I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, just the local history is often invisible. We move through places and past places constantly without really seeing those deeper connections. I bet you might have one or two kids though that you can really think about that that were obviously impacted. I'm thinking of Jenny A, for example.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about Jenny A.
So Jenny, when we first started, she was like, "Miss, I will do this. I don't want to be on camera. I don't want to talk to these people, but I will do this. I promise." And I was like, "Okay, Jenny." And so we started with a Padlet, and the kids answered like, "What's community? Where do I see myself in so many years?" And they did it on a day that I wasn't going to be there. That was their assignment, was to answer all these questions on the Padlet. So that evening, I like hopped on to make sure some of them did it, and Jenny answered every question. We hadn't even started yet. And she was like, "Miss, I don't care about these kids in Idaho." And I was like, "Okay, okay." And so then we had our first Zoom meeting with them, and she sat off to the side so she couldn't be seen. But she kept saying, like, "Miss, can you ask him this? Can you ask him this?" And I was like, "No, you can." And so she just sat there very quietly. And then like she would come in, we met on Fridays and we started doing like every other Friday. And she was like, is it this Friday? Like, are we gonna, she moved, like, she was always like front and center. She wanted to know about these kids. She wanted to talk to them. She was making friends with them, like, hey, like, how did you do on your test this week? Because, we talked a lot at the very beginning just about life, like what is going on. And so like when we were done and I was talking to him, she's like, man, like I really learned that like kids are the same no matter where they live. And that, whatever's going on, like with us, probably going on with kids other places. And she kind of felt more comfortable with like some of the struggles that she had gone through in high school and some things outside of school, knowing that like it wasn't just kids in our little Grove City area that had these struggles. It was like everywhere. And so
What a wonderful thing to realize is that you're not isolated and not alone. And
yeah.
Allison, being able to facilitate it as an educator, I think speaks quite a bit to you and your work with Alexis and your partners in this.
Mhm.
Allison, slide over. I'm going to ask Lena to slide up on the
Okay.
front bench here as well. Thank you for sharing that story. Lena, what we've been talking about, it sounds like, is engagement. That is, that students are more fully engaged, they're more curious, they're more apt to take risks, or at least address perceived risks when given the opportunity to work in these dispositions. And I think you've got a unique perspective in that you worked with seniors, and we all know that engagement with seniors in that last year is pretty tough. Lena, tell us a little bit about your work, both in Nebraska, where you were during the exchange, before you transitioned to Florida.
Thank you, Andy. That's such a good point because engagement really for all of us is limited. Our attention spans are limited. So that was something that my partner, Brian Shaw, and I thought about just kind of from the beginning during our facilitator training at the Smithsonian. During that training, we got to see a lot and experience a lot. But something we noticed really brought engagement to the group was a picture from the Smithsonian Archives of a family in the 1970s celebrating Independence Day. That really brought some rich discussion amongst the facilitators, and that just sparked right away for both of us. And we thought, this is it. This is what our exchange is going to be centered on. So taking kind of our experience of engagement within our facilitator cohort, we expanded that into our exchange with students. So in addition to picking something that just got their interest right from the beginning with discovering and exploring holidays and traditions, in Lincoln, we also welcomed guest speakers each week. So the slide that we have up right now shows on the top is Ash Wimes, and he shared with our group about Juneteenth. He brought a Juneteenth flag and taught us about the national history, his connection to the holiday, and what happens in our local community to commemorate Juneteenth. This was fascinating because some of our students had never heard of Juneteenth before. And I know that this stuck with them because Ash was our guest on week 1 of our exchange project. And on week 4, the students were still approaching me and talking to me about it. And on week 4, one student even shared a personal story of a connection they had made despite originally not knowing what Juneteenth was. So it was pretty amazing. You're doing something right with engagement when they're bringing it from week 1 to week 4. And then in the
Lena, I'm sorry. I want to just follow up a little bit on what you said, in terms of that engagement and curiosity, because, giving kids things to talk about is one thing, but modeling for them civil discourse and listening as much as sharing is another. And so you just described not only community members coming in to talk about things, but now Nebraska kids who may have a very different perspective, at least perceived worldview, than their California Bay Area partner cohort. How did you model civil discourse in the discussions?
That was something that we were able to model within our group time, within those exchanges. You mentioned listening really being a critical piece of that. And that was something that the students naturally engaged in, going back to our theme of engagement, just with those guest speakers coming in and exposing them to holidays and traditions that were not only part of the national narrative, but happening in our own local community that they maybe weren't aware of previously.
Yeah, fantastic. So tell us a little bit more then about the ways that you used the technology, particularly the Padlet, to create these connections. I think that might be the next slide.
Okay. Yes, so on the next slide, we definitely went over in our facilitator training the just all the strengths of object-based learning. So that was something that was important to bring into our exchange as well. So you can see on this Padlet, one of our activities was for students to actually explore the Smithsonian galleries. They had time to do this in their classrooms and then individually and then together for synchronous sessions. And you've heard other facilitators before me talk about the Padlet post that was very useful for this project. You can see on this Padlet post individual students and the archived item that they chose from the Smithsonian Gallery that they had a personal connection to. And then they went on to write a narrative about that connected to the object and then their personal story with it. And then in addition to that, the students were able to get on and leave reflections and comments about those and connect that way too.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think you too have some students that really jumped out at you in terms of the impact that it may have had, the learning that they demonstrated. I'm thinking of Miley, for example. Miley and Siham.
Yeah, I think that's on the next slide. And yes, so in addition to going through the Smithsonian galleries and taking that and reflecting on that and sharing about that together as a larger group, students took it a step further then. And Jamie mentioned earlier the usefulness of a Google Doc. So this happens to be a Google Doc when a student, so you see Miley and Siham on here, being able to share their personal stories and personal photos of traditions or holidays that they were connected to and what they were learning about it, then being able to share those with each other too.
Fantastic, Lena. As you connected these two communities, again, one just outside of San Francisco, one in the Lincoln, Nebraska area, there probably were I'm imagining that there were a lot of perceived differences. Tell us a little bit about the ways that your students both work through those and then realize that maybe there are not as many differences as we thought.
Yeah, I think of all the things that we learned throughout this project, that really is something that stood out the most to students. It was really amazing on week 4 in particular. We just brought that to the table and talked about those, and the students were really brave and transparent to share, like, hey, I had these preconceived notions of what you were like and what your school was like, and it turns out I was wrong. And also, they were right about some things too. And I think we learn from both, right? The similarities, certainly we explore those, we find those are wonderful points of connection. But there's also differences too, and those two are beautiful. It's an opportunity for connection and ongoing learning.
Yeah, thank you, Lena. And I want to now invite our last panelist, our final panelist, Chris Hemler, to join us. And Chris, we're going to sort of use your part of the panel, I think, to summarize a lot of the components we've heard so far. And at least to my ear, those components have been an emphasis on inquiry-based approach with the primary sources of humanistic work. It includes engaging students in meaningful ways, but doing so in a mindful format in which civil discourse is important, in which active listening and respect is important. And it's also to trust the process, that once people start talking and once people start, sharing their thoughts and sharing their perspectives, they really do find that we have a whole lot in common under this big American experience. Chris, you have done several exchanges, one with a colleague just outside of Houston, another with a colleague in Missoula, Montana. You've got a lot to share about this, but tell us specifically about what students did with this work. What did they produce? What did you witness them apply as they work through this process? Hey, Chris, good to see you again. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, and just special thank you to our sign language interpreter as well for keeping up with us. I appreciate you. So, I mean, I could go on for hours about the outcomes of this program, but really, I think for the most part, it boiled down to I think two main things that I saw related to community. And the first is that the students became interested in their partner communities. As you said, Andy, the first being Houston, Texas, and the other one in the Bitterroot Valley of Western Montana. And so there was an element of that, and that is something that I fully expected. I think the thing that surprised me the most, though, was how much the students became ambassadors for their own community in sharing the stories of our own place. The students became more and more interested and invested in their own community. I think that might have even surpassed their interest in their partner community as well.
That's fantastic. I suspect that you've got some examples you might share. Josiah might be one. Tell us about Josiah.
Yeah, so Josiah Josiah's an 8th grade student. He'll be in 9th grade next year, and Josiah is an artist. One of the most amazing artists that I've ever taught, and just as an 8th grader. But even as an artist, there were things about our own community that Josiah didn't recognize, and so we took the students to a place in Detroit fashion, an old industrial complex that has now been turned into an art collaborative called the Lincoln Street Art Park. And there's so much about that place that really our first exchange, our exchange with Houston, was all about art and civic engagement. And the students at first couldn't really see how art and civic engagement could go together until we went to the Lincoln Street Art Park. And Josiah was astonished as to how such an amazing resource could be in our own community, a resource that the students didn't know about before the exchange. But as we started to dive into this idea of art and civic engagement in our own community, while our partners dove into it in the Houston community, we learned so much and became so invested in the story of our own place. And that was something that was for me a bit unexpected, but very, very welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Learning about who we are, where we've come from is important, but doing it through the prism of another. And it's not just sharing our story, but it's seeing the reaction from the story listeners. Tell us a little bit about your Montana partner. I think the next slide might have some visual cues.
Yeah. So our exchange with Montana was very interesting. In our first exchange, I think the students between Metro Detroit, where I'm at, and Houston, the students saw a lot of similarities. And so I think the image on the screen, the top image, is of a food truck, a Honduran food truck that one of the students from our Houston exchange, their family owned. And so we had a student who owns Greek restaurants here in Metro Detroit. And so that was a really interesting part of the exchange. We saw a lot of similarities. But then in the lower left there was our exchange with Montana. There were so many differences with our exchange in Montana. And so there's a student there from Montana named Bailey. And Bailey could not make one of our synchronous exchanges because for a different project she had brought her cow to school, and so that is that's the parking lot of their high school, and that's Bailey with a teacher and her cow, and this I think was pretty indicative of the differences that the students saw between our communities. In fact, the students were asking, what's the most popular sport or club at your school? Thinking it would be like, football or basketball or soccer. But it was 4-H and FFA. And so the students learned a lot about the role that agriculture plays in communities because it's not a big part of suburban Detroit. And so, I think both of those exchanges showed ways in which we can connect, whether our communities are different or similar, or whether those similarities or differences are imagined or real. And I think it just speaks to the power of this program, the way that those students were able to see those connections between seemingly disparate communities.
And as we all know, as educators, once that bell is rung, it doesn't get unrung. On the next slide, this may be an example of a student perspective of Detroit. Set this up for us, Chris, with just 10 seconds of context, and then we'll play a very, very short clip.
Sure. So, as I mentioned, we went to the Lincoln Street Art Park with our 8th graders. We had met with a filmmaker who did a documentary film on the street art of Detroit. We met with one of the artists in our first synchronous call. We did an interview with them, and he invited us to his space. Well, obviously, our friends from Houston couldn't come, and so our students tried to bring the space to them. And so this is just a short clip of one of our students, Alex, who's explaining one part of Lincoln Street Art Park to our friends in Houston.
This dynamic environment shows creativity and inspiration, making every corner a visual delight. All of these murals have been painted by different artists, and they all have different meanings. They are painted by artists who have gotten charged for crime and or vandalisms. This shows how dedicated these artists are.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for sharing that and for giving us at least a little sneak peek of Detroit as well. We're starting to wrap up this session, this panel, so I could talk to you folks all day long. We've got about 4 minutes left, and I want to remind our audience that you can drop questions in the chat box, and our colleague and friend Jared will forward them to us, and we'll bring them in. If we could go to the next slide, though, I do also want to use this as an invitation to all of you to consider joining us for an upcoming cohort of the Democracy and Dialogue Virtual Exchange Program. We'll run 2 cohorts in 2026. The first will be from January to May. The second will be from September to December 2026. I do want to emphasize, though, that this isn't necessarily a semester-long exchange. We give the paired exchange facilitators full autonomy on designing the schedule and the length of activities and the themes that you work with. What we provide, though, is semester-long support that comes in the form of ongoing professional learning community meetings with our instructional coaches. That also includes being a part of the larger network of exchanges, so you're learning from and sharing with each other. The application period will open on October 18th, and we would love to see all of you apply. If this is your first time in the program, then we will invite you on a fully funded training summit in Washington at the Smithsonian in mid-January. We have just a minute or two. I've got one question myself. I'm going to ask this while we wait for questions to come through on the chat box. I'm going to offer this as kind of a rapid fire, and I think the 4 of you well enough to call you friends. I'm deeply respectful of your work as educators, so I want you to be candid with me here. Hey, team, are you optimistic? Allison, are you optimistic?
Very, very optimistic.
Yeah. I like it. Chris, are you optimistic?
I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, how can you not be? We teach the future of our nation, and whether it's through this program or not, we can see that future is bright.
Yeah, thank you. Lena, are you optimistic?
100%. Our young people are amazing and really engaged, and they're going to bring us to the next level that we need to be at.
You're giving me chills there, Lena. Hey, Jamie, I'm going to switch the question slightly for you.
Yeah.
Why are you optimistic? I know you're optimistic. Why are you optimistic?
Because I get a chance to work with the best and brightest students and young people each day, and I see the hope that they have, and I see their creativity. I see their leadership. I see their strength. They're not giving up, and they're fighters, and they have really wonderful things to add to the world right now, not just later, but right now they're adding really amazing things to the world. So I see it. So it's a very tangible evidence in my life where I see it daily.
And they're absolutely hungry for opportunities to express and practice those skills, those civic disposition skills, which are not artificial. They're part of our humanity. but kids and all the youth that you've described really seek and gravitate to authentic opportunities and investments to display that. We can go to the next slide, please. We're just about out of time, and I do want to thank everybody in the audience for joining us. Michelle, I absolutely would encourage you to apply. I think the students that you're referencing in the chat box would be great participants. And for any of you considering this, our request is that the youth be between 10 and 19, but you can be from any discipline, you can be from any education organization. What we will do is give you the training and the support to make your exchanges successful, and then we'll celebrate them by welcoming you into this Smithsonian family. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please do get in touch if you have questions. Allison, Chris, Jamie, Lena, it was a pleasure to see you again, to work with you. Enjoy your summer, everyone, and have a great school year. Thank you for being here.